Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David here. I'm joined right now by Basel Adra, who is a reporter with 972 Magazine and Local Call, who wrote a piece along with Yuval Abraham in The Nation. The destruction of this Palestinian community was greenlighted by Israel's Supreme Court. Thank you so much for taking some time to join us here on Left Reckoning today.
Thank you and your audience for having me.
No, I mean this is a really important, story, and there's a lot of importance, particularly for our American audience, to be paying attention to what's happening in Palestine because the U.S. plays a role here. But I mean, could you talk a little bit about this Supreme Court decision? We're talking particularly about Masafer Yatta, which is a larger region in the West Bank. If this decision from the Supreme Court goes through, if the policies are enacted, as you noted in your piece, this will be one of the largest expulsions, population transfers of people in the West Bank since 1967. Could you sketch out a little bit about, Masafer Yatta, like, and who controls it, who lives there for our audience who might not be familiar?
So yeah, Masafer Yatta is in the southern occupied West Bank. It's in the West Bank and on the border of the 1948. We are like 20 communities. Our livelihood in the history and kept until now is farmers. We keep sheep. We have 20 small villages that all in these villages people are farmers that keep sheep and planting the seeds and olive trees and living this simple life. And in the past, like in the last like in the before 50 years and 100 year and 200 years, and in the history the people digged caves to live in them as houses, and was really like, as we hear from our grandparents, a simple and a good life that they used to live as farmers here. But start to be like under control, and people start to be harmed in their livelihood mainly since 1967, since the Israeli occupation forces took over this land and start like controlling everything about it. So in the 80s, the Israeli occupation forces started three like actions or three designations in order to legitimize the presence of the Israeli civilian settlers like living in our land in Masafer Yatta and all over like Area C, what's so called Area C in the West Bank. So first thing, they designated a huge piece of land of our like lands in Masafer Yatta as a state land. And this state land goes exclusively to the settlers to build the settlements and outposts and farms. And in that time, within the same year, they started to build three settlements here in the in Masafer Yatta, and one of them just a few hundred meters away from my home and from my community.
Mm.
And then there is the other designation, which is the third one. It's like they designated 14 community out of the 20 as a firing zone, which is mean that this land would go only for the Israeli occupation army to do military exercises on it. And actually, an Israeli politician at that time, Ariel Sharon, who was a minister for the ministry for the agriculture ministry, wrote in his secret documentation that was released last year, just like 40 years after the designation, that he is designating these 14 communities as a firing zone, not for the soldiers. It is for the settlers to build the settlements there and to expel out the Palestinians. And they will use the word firing zone and military area for the pretext in the court. Since that designation until
Mm.
last May, they've been putting pressure, like increasing each like year the pressure on the residents of Masafer Yatta to take them and to drive them away from their homes, especially from these 14 communities. So in 1999, they invaded these villages, and they with the heavy forces and the military trucks and big vehicles, and put all the stuff inside them, and also they put above this the children and old men and the women, and they beat up some of the men and arrest them and drive away the rest with their sheep. That day, 700 Palestinians were made homeless by Israel. This was very traumatic and very, very horrifying like action to be done. by a chance there was like a human rights organizations who would come to cover the daily harassments by the Israeli military forces in the area, and that thing happened. So they got to film this and to take photos and to publish it. And that year, to like there was also the Israeli left wing, liberal left wing Zionists playing a role on that, and they don't want to be embarrassed in front of the international community that the pictures going outside that the Israeli occupation forces like taking Palestinian 700 people in trucks and transferring them out. So 6 months later from that action, and within the steadfastness of the Palestinians who really fight to go back to their land, they were every day got beaten by the soldiers and got arrested, and they confiscate their sheep and their tractors. So the court find itself under pressure of international community, human rights organizations, and the people who appealed on what happened with them, and who kept fighting on the ground for their land because they don't have any other place to go for it, like to go live in it. So what happened? The court decided in the March 2000 that the residents of Masafer Yatta can go back live in their land until the final decision will come out. So then, since then until last May, people were really fighting. I am personally like grown up in this situation where I witnessed and document hundreds of the demolitions that going on weekly by the Israeli occupation forces against the Palestinians. And within the same time, they were able to go back to their land. Immediately, the Israeli army allowed the settlers to build another like four outposts. They kept saying these outposts are illegal, but these three of the outposts were built in the firing zone also. But the settlers there facilitated to have electricity, clean water, and public transportations, asphalt, and big bulldozers come to dig for their homes and their building. I never saw like a Israeli bulldozer going inside demolish this while they keep saying it's illegal. So you have this picture that they're coming weekly to do these demolitions against our communities, and the same time facilitating for the settlers to expand more and more into our land. And this is just crazy to imagine it. We're living. I grew up in this situation where I live in a community that just got destroyed. My people go apply for the Israeli army, like to request of permissions, paying a lot of money, wasting money and time, and seeking to have permissions for the villages, for the houses. Always the same like result: reject and
Mm.
demolition. 98, sorry, 0.5% of our Palestinian request in the West Bank to get like permissions to build houses or water well or school or anything in their communities, it's reject. With the recent government, now it's zero.
Mm.
No permission. Like even the 1.5%, it's deleted. So what happened? All these years, this is what was going on. In order, like the Israeli army put the people under daily pressure. They would go and invade the houses in the night in the tents, like taking the people outside, the children, and they like fake to do research inside the houses, like terrorizing the people, damaging properties, and taking them out in the cold, let them wait outside until the soldiers like do their like fake research in the houses. In the day, they would come back with a bulldozer and bulldozer these houses, bulldozing the roads. In 2019 was like a massive day where I document this from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. Israeli forces brought huge bulldozers and cut down 25 kilometers of water pipe that was giving like a little bit of water for all the communities of Masafer Yatta. It was like a whole day. They were digging roads and taking the pipe outside and cutting it.
Mm.
So under to put the people under pressure that they would leave by themselves from this land, that they would not find any other solution except leaving it, and didn't work. So what happened last May, the 4th of May, the High Court came out with this political final decision, which is to ignore all the evidence about the Palestinians living in this, the history,
Mm-hmm.
the elements for the community living here, the international law, the international human rights law, the international community that looking at this situation, they ignored everything about it, just believe their soldier because it's a political case. There is this
Mm-hmm.
court. We don't vote for it. We don't vote for the laws that controlling our life as Palestinians in this area. It's all controlled by a foreign army who's imposing everything by force, by power, by guns. So the final decision was to ignore everything and just to give the green light for the Israeli military occupation to drive away over than 1,300 Palestinians from these communities away, and to give this land for, as they still claiming, a firing zone. So since this decision come out in last May, for 2 months they've been driving like three to four tanks and huge bulldozers, and they do explosions in the ground. They put targets for the soldiers in the roads where the people walking and shot at them. The tanks driving between the houses and on the fields, on the crops of the Palestinians, and prevent any movement. The soldiers do checkpoints, prevent any movement in between, within the communities or outside or inside these communities. Two villages stayed under sewage. They established like a metal gates and caravans for the soldiers to stay 24 hours. The residents of these communities wait every time they want to pass in and out to their community, like to go buy their stuff and go inside, or going to the doctors and they want to go back to their village, between 6 to 8 hours each time they want to go in and out. School children have been waiting there, like, and search their bags and their bodies and ask them for IDs, and they were really harassed by the soldiers and waiting hours under the sun. Their teachers have been prevented to go in and was beaten up by the soldiers and detained for hours. The cars of those teachers were confiscated under the pretext that they are moving on a firing zone area. And lawyers and journalists and activist cars have been confiscated. Only military and settlers cars it's driving in this like 14 communities, and settlers go for fun, like with motorcycles and with four wheels cars to drive on the mountains and on the roads. And over than that, they whipped out 15 like houses and special properties for the residents of these communities. I want to speak about one new thing happened in after the
Mm-hmm.
decision, and really living like it's a traumatic for me. One normal day in November, like in the morning, while students in a primary school in Masafer Yatta were had their classroom classes as usual, a heavily forces invaded their classroom at 8, like with like in the time they started their class. The soldiers ran like crazy to the doors of these classrooms, slammed the doors, and other group of soldiers start pushing us away as journalists and parents. And one soldier start throwing stun grenades. When the first stun grenade like were bombed, the students, these kids really opened the windows of their classrooms, taking some of their books and start jumping from the windows and crying and running away, and the soldiers keep running after them like to make sure they're leaving away from around the building. And the soldiers went inside the school taking their bags and balloons and tables and chairs, and taking them to military vehicles, confiscating them, stealing them. And then a bulldozer were driven in and owned by a settler who just living in an illegal outpost nearby in our land, come in, and for like some minutes he drove all, like he bulldozed all the school and smashed it under the eyes of everyone. I mean, this is the American money that they are funding it to this
Mm-hmm.
foreign military that controls everything to in order to destroy our life. I mean, Americans should know that their money going to destroy our schools, our water system, our solar panels, our roads, our homes, and this thing has nothing to do with the Israeli security or the things that they are talking about. It's we want
Mm-hmm.
just normal life as a humans living on our land as a people who owns this land, and having all the evidence to prove that this is our land, and we just want to build our homes, our schools, and to have clean water and lights at night, and to sleep really safely. I don't feel safe sleeping at night because last year they invaded my home about 7 times at night. They detained my father, they harassed us, they broke the door of my room in order to get inside it. And all these soldiers come with masks on their faces, with long guns, and with like 30 soldiers. They will invade the
Mm-hmm.
village. They will prevent anyone to move and make arrests in the village, throwing stun grenades just for fun. I filmed this and I posted, and it's just so crazy how this is can keep go on, and how there's a fight in the US to speak if Israel is a racist state or not a racist state. What do you want
Yeah.
after all the evidence that you got from Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, the biggest Israeli human rights like organization, and the evidence that we film every day and the harassments that we are talking about? We just don't want to be controlled by a foreign army who controls everything about our life in order to drive us away. Nothing here about security, nothing here about religion. It's all political to steal our land and to annex it. This is why they are creating this like, and those Israelis who's now chanting for democracy and against the what's to the judicial revolution, or I don't know what they call it. Where were them when
Hmm.
this like high court decided last year about Masafer Yatta to drive away 1,300 Palestinians? Actually, the one that wrote this judgment is a settler himself living in a settlement in the West Bank and like violating the international law, and still can be a judge and deciding the future of
Hmm.
1,300 residents of Masafer Yatta. Where were these Israelis who's now chanting for democracy? Where were them about these decisions? We also deserve our like freedom, deserve to choose and to vote for our leaders, deserve to vote for the laws that control my life and controls to give me permission for a home or not. And I don't have this, and I am like 27-year old, and my parents
Hmm.
doesn't have this rule or this like freedom.
Well, I mean, I want to talk a little bit more about life on the ground, but and I totally agree with what you were just saying. But as you outline in your piece, I mean, even for like a decision from the Israeli Supreme Court, this one seemed extremely cynical, right? It was very clearly political. Y'all note there was a researcher whose work they cited in the case to sort of deny the history of Palestinians living in that area. Um, and that researcher, y'all got some quotes from him, and he was horrified that his work was being used in this way. I mean, could you break down, some of the aspects of I mean, the case is like it's horrifying in like what it's doing, but also like the way that it's justified is just ludicrous, in my opinion.
Yes, so for the case, like we brought like experts, for example, to for in the history and in archaeological sites to prove for the court that the people of that we have been living in Masafer Yatta for hundreds of years, and we
Hmm.
didn't come after it was designated as a firing zone as the Israeli military forces are claiming. There was like, for example, a shops, notebooks from the 40s in the area
Hmm.
here. There was aerial footage from 1948 also that showing there was buildings, for example, in the villages of Masafer Yatta. So the judge answered on that. Oh, there is buildings, but how you can prove there was a life inside these buildings? So you see, like how they are ignoring and how they are throwing this away. An Israeli writer who came into Masafer Yatta in the 30s, and this, like what he wrote, was used in the court as evidence that in the 30s there was people living here, and the caves that are like 100-year and 200-year old and lived by the people of Masafer Yatta here. Also, the documents of Ariel Sharon that he wrote that we want to designate Masafer Yatta as a firing zone in order to use it for the settlements and the settlers and to stop the expansion of the Arabs, as he said, to create their state. So all of this were ignored because the judge were a settler.
Hmm.
He's a settler that live in the settlement, and he works for from his perspective, from what he need, from his goal as a settler is to take more land and to expel more Palestinians out of the land and to take more land that will be empty for the settlers and the settlements.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly horrifying. I mean, so in a second, I want to talk about your run-in with the security forces. But before that, I mean, you've been sort of talking about this a bit. I mean, you were talking about this, harassment and this terrorizing of children in their school. But could you talk about, sort of daily life now that like literally there are security forces practicing with live ammunition near where people are living. I mean, can you talk about this kind of shift, right? There's always been this occupation, but literally just hearing the sounds of like military machines and warfare, like how does that affect, daily life for people living in the area?
So when they are like announced that there is like a military exercise going on to be in the area, there's no movement. Shepherds can go outside to the fields because the tanks are driving between the houses and on the crops itself to destroy them. Shepherds are scared to go outside and it's unsafe. And soldiers both like
Hmm.
expulsion and on the ground and they explode them. They do like for long distance checkpoints. They prevent anyone to go in or out from the communities. Anyone like journalists like me, hard to move from a village to another to document what's going on. They also, as I mentioned, set targets on the road and really, literally they let the soldiers shoot at them like with live bullets and on the road. And last year, what they also shot from the tank, and one of the bullet, it's big bullet, hit one of the houses on the roof, and because the roof were metal, the this big bullet stuck on the roof, and we called the army through the lawyers that the training is causing like harms for the houses, and people were afraid. The family were inside the house when the bullet hit it. And they came like when with a one military jeep and checked, and they said no, there's nothing here, nothing. We did nothing with the training. By chance, there was a visit for the European embassies and the European representative to this village to tell them about the Masafer Yatta case. And the people cut the roof of the house in front of the European representative, and they took out the bullet. And it was a huge bullet that was shot from a tank, and no one have a tank in this area except the Israeli occupation forces who could have a tank. And
Hmm.
when we took
Hmm.
pictures of this bullet and take it to them, they said, "Oh, it's maybe happened because of our training." What mean maybe? Who else have
Yeah.
this like? And they played this game as they shot Shireen Abu Akleh, the journalist in Jenin. They said, "No, it's not us. It's the
Hmm.
Palestinians," and then maybe it's us, and indeed, oh, it was a mistake by us. The journalist was shot by the Israeli soldiers. So even like because there's no consequences for their crimes and for
Hmm.
the acts that they are doing. They shot like a house with a bullet of a tank, and no one will do anything to them. So why they would care about it? So this is like the impunity that they are covered by it's covering Israeli government always by the US mainly and by the biggest like countries in Europe that they don't help us to go to the ICC. They don't do anything to end this occupation except like some condemnations here and there and some posts in social media, but there's no actions to done. And it is the time
Hmm.
of to act against the apartheid and against the racism that we are facing every day in our life.
Well, so no, and I definitely want to get to the international stuff in just 1 second. But before we get there, you had a run-in with security forces last week, and I can't imagine that the mobilization, militarization has made it easy to do what you do, which is cover what's happening in the region. I mean, could you break down your experience with being detained recently?
So there's daily harassment by the settlers. That's not pogrom as happening pogrom where everyone talk about it, but there is a daily harassment that no one like talk about it almost where the settlers drive like come. This is like a new policy that they are doing, creating new farms, and they would go with the sheep from to the Palestinian special properties to the crops in order to harass the Palestinians and to make them tired from their like staying there because the Israeli military occupation can't just confiscate this land because the laws still prevent them from confiscating like special properties. So that what they would go, they invest in the settlers'
Hmm.
daily violence and harassments. That the settler would go day after day to the Palestinian fields in order to make them tired going to this field. So the settler would go there and like graze his sheep and claim the Palestinian throw at him stone. So the army would come and arrest this Palestinian, take him to the jail for several days, paying a high fine, and then would be released. And this game until the Palestinian would be tired from going to his land and then it ended up to the settlers. So this like family called me that the settler grazed in their field and asked me to come film him. So when I went there, more settlers joined, and one was driving the car very crazy, and then he claimed that person threw at him stones. So the army arrived there, the police arrived there, and then start to invade, like huge forces invaded like the my village, and start to attack people literally and beating them up and searching houses for the kids who throw stones at them, and as they claimed. And then officer like came to me and told me, give me your ID and your phone. I gave him, and he said, you have to open your phone because you are here and filming. This is what the settler told him. I told him I am a
Mm,
journalist and I have card, and you can't just do it. There's a police is here and they didn't ask for it, and you there's rules for this. And he said, listen, the rules
mm-hmm,
take like long time. I want you to open your phone now and to show me the videos, and I release you, or there is a longer way to take the videos. I told him this is illegal and you can't just do that. He said, okay. He called on the phone for another military jeep that arrived, and they took me behind this jeep, start handcuffed me. When they were doing that, the settler were still there and start like insulting me and raising his middle finger to me. The soldiers were like smiling and handcuffing me, putting like clothes on my eyes to cover them, and put me in the jeep and start driving away. And then they transfer
mm-hmm,
me from the jeep to another like van of the soldiers, and who start also insulting me, and they took me like they drive I don't know where I couldn't see. It's mental thing that you can't see, you can't understand
mm-hmm,
the language except like they know the bad words in Arabic that they're cursing me with it. And like they kept driving until we arrived in a place, I assume it's a military base, and they put me down, start pushing me hard to walk with them. I was like trying to ask them that I want to understand what's happening, where I am, and they just kept telling me to shut up and shut your mouth, and pushed me and grabbed the chair and make me sit on it, and then grab the chair to the sun and make me sit there and just try to like say bullshits like, why don't you live in Jenin? Why you don't go to Jenin if you are a journalist for Al
mm-hmm,
Jazeera? And then like asking me if you are an educated person, why you ended up in a military base with a soldier handcuffed. I told him, if you are educated enough, you would not be in this place and in this military base. And they like kept telling me that like asked telling me that I'm a dog, and they know who I am, and I'm writing anti-Israeli
mm-hmm.
reports and this shit like for several hours under sun. Then the same officer came and take me to the jeep and take me to the entrance of my village, and he gave me my phone and my ID that was in his pocket for all this time. I don't know what he did into it. And this is not the first time. Just last May, I was beaten up and assaulted by four Israeli soldiers for like 40 minutes only because I went to film them trying to demolish like a shelter for my neighbor. And they decided like immediately to arrest me violently. I was protesting that I don't, this is illegal. There's no excuse. I'm just filming. They didn't care. They really grabbed me on the ground and beated me up, and later I was like hospitalized because of that. And just this is like recently, but almost
Mm-hmm.
each time I go to the field, they're like blocking us and preventing us and try to arrest us and create a flying checkpoint on the way where we are driving, in order, for example, to prevent us from reaching the place where they are demolishing or doing something. And also they confiscate the cars for journalists and activists when we go to, for example, to the communities that designated as a firing zone under pretext that this civilian car can't be in a firing zone area.
Well, I mean, it's awful. I can't wrap my head around it. In the last couple of minutes, I mean, this is very clearly not in step with international law. I mean, could you talk a little bit about what you and other people in the area would like to see from the international community, and in particular the United States, on this issue? Something that's more significant than, for example, condemnations from politicians from time to time.
It's crazy. I mean, today we are more than ever really disappointed and angry because with the last government, it's very clear more racism toward us. There is like a
Hmm.
massive of settlers building in the area here, even in Masafer Yatta, where the court decided that civilians can't live here. The settlers are creating new outposts and attacking people really every day. Like I'm getting calls like and activists here with me getting calls like every day from different communities. We are not able even to cover this, that the settlers going and harassing these people. As I mentioned, not necessarily the pogroms, but the settlers go graze near the people's houses and chase shepherds away. They're harming the livelihood of the people, the food of the people. So in order to make them live away, recently they also start to come to the water wells that the people dig to and collected the water from the rain, and they come and just waste this water. The people call the police, the army, they ignore them. They just come to harass the Palestinians when they arrive, and they would say, "These settler, they are kids, and we can't do anything to them. You can't do anything to them." And the soldiers would stay with them around, and the settlers like create like literally they're building like tents for their sheep above the well, the only water resource for the communities in Masafer Yatta, and they stay there with the soldiers and like and we look at the international community that always ask Israel like in their condemnations to not change the status quo, but the status quo are very, very bad for us to live in
Hmm.
it. And there is no status quo. The settlers and the army have all the power to change the facts and the de facto on the ground. And this is what they are doing. They are going from a piece of the land after another one, from a village after another. It's the first time for me to watch Palestinian people demolishing their tents and houses and living. Near Ramallah, a whole community, 200 people just left their community because settlers like kept like attacking them every night. And one day they like steal 337 sheep from one shepherd under protection of the police and the army. Just a settler arrived there and claimed that this sheep belonged to him, and he bring another like settlers that they decide to take these sheep away. So the Palestinians decided that their turn coming one after one, so they decided to move here in the South Hebron Hills area. Really, families are start like to demolish their tents and houses and leave their homes because of the settlers like daily harassments, and the soldiers come invade the houses in the night and arrest like residents. While the international community not just not doing anything of on that, but the opposite, like a lot of money. For example, there are six Israeli settlers like organizations are registered in New York as a charities, and they're getting $60 million each year in order to damage our life, and they're creating like
Hmm.
huge farms and on our land for the cows, for the sheep, for the chicken, for the vineyard, for the cherries, and they're getting water for all these farms. Why us Palestinians in this heat wave don't have clean water to drink in the day, while they have these like huge farms to make economy for these settlements, and all of it's money from the US that's coming here, or for the military to commit these demolitions and night invasions and arresting people, or for the settlers who's like occupying this land and colonize it. So
Hmm.
Americans should look after their money, and these acts should stop, and they should support us as Palestinians to get our freedom and our dignity and our life as a human beings.
I can't agree more, and I think there's a tremendous responsibility for people in the U.S. To be paying attention to this and advocating for our government to change its policies, because it's not just a bystander. In fact, it's an actor in the area. Rezel, thank you so much for spending some time with us today on Left Reckoning. We'll link to your work and to this piece, and really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.